Hello and welcome back to Chasing Excellence, a show about chasing what truly matters. My name is Patrick Cummings. As always, I am here with Ben Bergeron. Hello and how are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks, Patrick.
I'm happy to hear it. Thanks everybody out there for joining us. We've got something fun, hopefully fun. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a little bit. Recently, inside of the Chase Club, which is our premium membership, which you can learn more about at chasingexcellence.email. Inside of the Chase Club, we did our second book club. I'm loving these book clubs. We're still kind of figuring out exactly how to do them, what people like. And this time around, what we did was over the course of, I think, 5 weeks or 6 weeks, we read through the book, The Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter. The book examines how modern conveniences are eroding our resilience and explores how pushing beyond our comfort zones can enhance our physical, mental, and emotional well-being. I pulled out this one little quote that I think is from the end of the book, but I think it nicely in one or two sentences encapsulates what the book is about. So I'm just going to read that. In our pursuit of better living, we've allowed comfort to calcify our natural movements and strength. Without conscious discomfort and purposeful exercise, a forceful push against comfort creep will only continue to become weaker and sicker. So we're going to chat about the book today. Like I said, we went through a number of weeks of conversations inside the Chase Club, but fret not if you have not been reading it with us, if you have not actually read The Comfort Crisis. This isn't a book review. You don't need to have read the book for this conversation, hopefully to be of use and valuable to you. Instead, we're going to talk about one of the more interesting and thought-provoking ideas inside of the book, which is from the beginning of the book, called the Misogi. And so that's what I'm excited to chat with you about, Ben. But first, I would love to know, this was not a book you've read before. In other words, you read this book, and then I think shortly after you sent me a text and said, next book club book is The Comfort Crisis. And so I would love to know, like, when you read it, like, what stuck out at you? Why did you want to spend some extra time with this book inside of the Chase Club?
Oh, so, I like to read. And one of the things I do when I'm reading is I go, would this book make the top 50? And I actually have a working document with the top 50.
Yep, you do.
And I go, okay, and that top 50 is not here's my favorite book, here's my next book. I actually think in terms of if I was to give somebody, that's never been a part of our little club here that we have, and I was to go, hey, here's how to become part of, what would be the first book I would have them read? Mm-hmm. This might be that first book.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's not what I thought it was going to be. It is what I thought it was going to be, but it's so much more. Like this book has been suggested to me a few different times, and when just from the title, I'm like, yeah, but I know that, I got it. Like so arrogant. Like, no, I don't need to read that one because I know I know that doing hard things makes you better. And this is, first off, Michael Easter is a phenomenal author, phenomenal writer. Right after I read this, I read his other book, The Scarcity Brain. Good. This one's way better. And he does it in a very engaging way through this epic elk hunt in the boonies of Alaska. Basically where like maybe no other human being's ever been before. Pretty cool.
Very few. Yep.
And what this book did is it not only did what I thought it would do is like reinforce like, yep, this is it. And also kind of gave us some more ammunition for what it is that we're trying to do here. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that like just really people have been listening for a while are going to know that I'm a big fan of, basically human evolution and the way that what our DNA and what our ancestors experienced, which has shaped our DNA today. And, what you kind of like realize really quickly is we're now living for the first time ever, like really, there's some really big, meaningful moments in the history of humanity. And, whether we talk with Homo sapiens or where we say actually we started, but life didn't change that much at all until the agricultural revolution. We were hunters and gatherers. Until we figured out, hey, we could domesticate animals and raise crops. And once we did that, we didn't have to move around. We could create civilizations. That's a really big moment. And then from there, not a whole lot changed until the Industrial Revolution. Because now, when that happens, we can now move faster than a horse. Before that, no news could travel faster than a horse. But you have the Industrial Revolution, you have like automation and the assembly line and wheels and the engine and steamships and railroads. And then, not a whole lot changed, but man, those came a lot closer than the first ones. And then all of a sudden you get these next ones. We're going through like revolution after revolution after revolution now, to where the majority of America lives better, more lavishly, with more comfort than the greatest kings did, just a few hundred years ago. That's wild. Like, no one took a hot shower up until, 100 years ago or so. Like, that's whatever it was, 200, certainly not before 200 years ago. That's crazy to think about. And now where we are, I can't help but think of like how close we are to the movie WALL-E. Have you seen it? The cartoon?
Yep.
Where humans just like, we don't leave a chair and we just become this sick species, which we are basically just like, we're not actually living anymore. And this book, the reason it resonates so much was because it essentially went like, yeah, if we don't pay attention, this is where we're going to end up. I think that's why I liked it so much, is that it went, hey, for all of humanity, we were forced to do these things.
Yep.
You didn't have a choice. Your day was going to be full of physical challenge just to survive, just to build the fence, to go gather the goods, to go walk to the place. It's just like, that was a part of our everyday lives. And only really recently, in the last 150 years, 2 generations, has that changed. And the way it's changing now is so fast that this is a crisis of comforts. And of course, I like the sensationalism part of that, like, because I believe it. I am a believer that if we don't do these things intentionally, the way he's kind of proposing, that we will end up sicker and weaker for the first time in history.
Yeah, I think that it's something we've talked about a little bit before in a number of different conversations. But I really like what you just said, because it highlights what I think is a really fundamental truth, which is that we're not built for the world that we find ourselves in. Of course, we can cope with it. We do our best. We don't think about it too often, but we're not really built to know what's happening on the other side of the world, 24 hours a day. We're not built to be exposed to the kinds of foods that we're exposed to every time we leave our house. Like all of these different things that we've set up, that culture has built up, that society has built up, that have gone so much faster and so much beyond what our DNA and our biology and our evolution has set us up for. And I think that this book does a really good job of saying, well, slow down. Here are the places where the world has moved faster than you are really ready for, really capable of thriving inside of. And so if we can, not to call out one of our frameworks of awareness, intention, and action, if we can be aware of these places, of these things for which we are not particularly prepared for, we can at least be in a position to act with some intention to combat against, and I love the phrase he uses all throughout the book, the comfort creep, which is really what it is. It's like, it's not happening over the course of a day or a week or a month, but it's happening over the course of our lives, where we go from one thing and we wake up, 15, 20 years later, and all of a sudden we don't remember how to even do that. We don't remember how we could possibly have survived in those times. And yet, to your point, that's honestly the only way we've ever survived, except for this flash of seconds in which we've been alive. Okay. So that's what the book's about. So some of the bigger themes in it is to get outside. It's to embrace boredom. It's to engage in physically challenging things, to risk failure inside of those physical things. It's imposed depravity. It's thinking about death. It's carrying things and running far. And it's certainly first world stress versus old world stress. So those are just some of the big themes. Again, we're not going to go through the whole book. I'm going to dive into something more specific, but hopefully by now we recommend it and it's worth reading. So those are some of the big themes. So here's the thing. It's in the first part of the book, and it's the thing that stuck out to me right away, and it's the thing that I kept thinking about and kept coming back to and kept re-engaging with as we went through the Chase Club Book Club. And so the big idea inside of, and you alluded to this already, is this concept of the Misogi, which is, I don't think I have a clean definition of what this is in terms of like a dictionary definition of what it is, but it's effectively going out, doing in a very difficult, what's the word how would you describe a Misogi? What words would you use to describe it?
Outside, physical, solo,
Yep.
uncertainty,
Yep.
chance of failure, transformative.
Yep. Love all those. Okay. So as you mentioned this already, but throughout the through line of the book was Michael Easter's trip with a few other people more experienced than him, but they went into the outback of Alaska and they went on this 6 week, I forget the length, 5, 6 week, 7 week caribou hunt where they were doing their best to live off the land, all in pursuit of this like one epic hunt. And so that's a good example of what a Misogi is. And so as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, yeah, this is it. Like, let's do more of this. And then the reality of what a Misogi actually really looks like, at least in the context of Easter's story, it's like, okay, well, I don't have 4 weeks. I don't have 5 weeks. I don't hunt. I'm not about to send myself off into the woods in pursuit of caribou, right? And so I started thinking about, how do we take the themes, the concepts, the good out of the Misogi and bring it back into the context of our lives? Because I won't speak for you, but I don't think you're about to go off into do a 6 week hunt through the woods of Alaska, right? Like, and so what I started thinking about is, what does it look like to create, to design, to embark upon what I just started thinking about as Micro-Misogi, right? And so I started thinking about like, okay, well, what does that look like? What could that look like? And so that's what hopefully we can play around with today, because I don't have any great answers as to this, but I was hoping we could have kind of a fun conversation around how, if this was the goal, if the goal was to take as much of this idea of the Misogi as we can and fit it into our lives, what are some of the guidelines, the constraints, the rules that we would set for ourselves to ensure that we were getting the most out of it, but within, again, the confines, the constraints of our current life? So I've got 5 rules. I would love to just throw them out to you, and then we can play with, if I don't know if they're the right rules, I don't know if you change them, if you would add to them, whatever. But we haven't talked about this, so this is going to be my conversation for us. Yeah. Cool? Okay.
Yep.
So I'll go through them quickly, and then we'll maybe break them down one by one. So I've got 5, like I said. And these aren't in any particular order. These are just as I came to me. 1, entirely outside. Number 2, solitary and device free. Number 3, no two can be the same. So no 2 Micro-Misogis can be the same. Number 4, it needs to be quittable. We can talk about what that means. And number 5, it has to be done between 4 and 48 hours. So first one first, I'm just going to pull out a quote. I've got a quote kind of for each one of these as to why these popped out to me as relevant rules. Entirely outside. This is from the book, page 112 from The Comfort Crisis. Famed biologist E.O. Wilson developed a theory called the biophilia hypothesis, which says we have an ingrained call to be in nature that's in competition with our evolutionary desire to control our environment. The thinking goes like this: we evolved in nature and therefore are programmed within our genes a need to be in and connect with nature and living things. If we don't, we go a little haywire, as if we're missing a necessary nutrient for our body, mind, and sense of self. And so we talk about nature, we talk about getting outside inside of our connect bucket, right? We always talk about, you're really good at saying, connect with ourselves, connect with each other, and connect with nature. So again, rule number 1 on the table for keeping or throwing out: the Micro-Misogi needs to be entirely outside.
So that quote is so phenomenal. I've actually copied and pasted that and put that into my own documents when I talk about connection. So factor number 5 for us is connect, and one of them is connecting with nature. I love how he says it's like a necessary nutrient.
Yeah, I love
that. Without it, we go a little bit haywire. And I think of this kind of like as, you put a killer whale in captivity and the fin kind of dips over. I feel that's a little bit like us in cubicles with fluorescent lighting. It's how I felt when I was doing my old job in finance. I really felt like I was rotting away, and I couldn't get that out of my mind. That's essentially why one of the really big reasons I changed my careers is because I was like, humans are not built to do this. Like, this is not the way we're supposed to exist. It just wasn't a part of us at all until, as I said, the Industrial Revolution, where we created factories And factories is where we went like, hey, you sit at this stool and do this job for 8 hours and we'll pay you X wages. It's like, yeah, and that's where our souls go to die. So I just really, the research is there. We've talked about, the medical community is starting to come around pretty good that exercise and nutrition are kind of integral pieces to living a healthy life. That's kind of like, okay, like, why are we even talking about that? Because 2.5 decades ago, that was not accepted. That's new. Now we're starting to get to the place where people are like, okay, maybe sleep is one of these things too. It's weird, but we've talked about this for a long time. But before, lack of sleep was a badge of honor. Like if you could go with only 4 hours of sleep, you're busy. It means you're productive. It means you're successful. And if you slept a lot, you were lazy. It was actually the opposite of a thriving human being. And now we're kind of going like, whoa, wait a minute. Maybe sleep has to do with health. I am so confident that we're going to be talking about humans getting outside into nature in the same way we're talking about sleep right now in 5 to 10 years. The same way will just start coming into vogue. This is also going to start coming into vogue of like, no, there's a lot to it. And they're going to talk about like how you connect with different parts of the earth in different ways. So we need to be out there. We need to be doing that thing. So that quote and the idea of like, yes, the Misogi should be outside is so, I think it's such a necessary ingredient for what we're trying to do.
Yeah, agreed. Cool. Okay. Number 2 that I've got, solitary and device free. Here's a little quote from page 77 of the book. In a study, this one's crazy. In a study conducted by scientists at the University of Virginia, 1/4 of women and 2/3 of men chose to shock themselves rather than to be alone with their thoughts.
What? Isn't that crazy?
It's insane.
That is insane. Was 1/3 of men and 2/3 of women would rather shock themselves than be alone with their thoughts. Holy smokes. Yeah. So that goes into where he's talking about like boredom. Okay. And for true boredom, you need to, the easiest distraction is with somebody else, right?
Yep.
Well, I should say that. The easiest distraction is by picking up your phone.
Yes.
But right, if we're trying to combat boredom, or if we're trying to elicit boredom, I should say.
Yep.
Solitary seems to make a lot of sense. Now, here's where I would go like, I don't want to dissuade people from doing hard things in groups.
I know. It's exactly, which is what I want to talk about. Because I that's exactly what I thought is doing these with 2 or 3 other people might also be powerful.
I think that's, yes, right. I'm very excited about a trip that we're going to take in the near future. We talk about this, hopefully we'll talk about a lot more, going on soul-searching adventures with about a dozen other people. I'm super excited. And the whole idea is this transformative experience in nature, that type of thing. But I will say the thing that's referenced the most in this Misogi conversation in terms of an example of Misogi is the Spartan warriors. And their Misogi, which is where a lot of this has come from, it was really popularized but misrepresented in the movie 300, where the 12-year-old boy goes out and he has to kill a wolf on his own. He goes out in the woods, and once he kills a wolf, he can come back to the tribe, and now he's transformed from a trainee into a Spartan warrior. That's actually not the truth behind their Misogi. Their Misogi was it was older, first off. I think it was at age 17 or 18, and you went off. I don't know what would be harder, to actually have to kill a wolf with, basically a dagger, or what they did, which is you need to live by yourself in the woods with nothing for a year. Think of like how formidable you would become in like what could throw you off track? Yep. Like how centered you would become, how independent you would become, how confident you would become. Now, here's the thing. That's like the highest level of Misogi, a full year by yourself doing essentially the hardest thing, living off the land with nothing for a year. But that is solo. And I think there's a lot of credibility to the solo aspect of this. I think of it much like the 12-hour walk, right? what you said is like by yourself without, without devices or something like that? Without
device free, yep.
Yeah, device free. That's the same rules as the 12-hour walk.
Exactly.
And I like that a lot because you go for that 12-hour walk and you're scrolling Instagram the whole time. I don't think you're going to walk away with that. No pun intended.
Yeah, right.
I don't think you're going to walk away with the same transformative experience you would have if you spent those 12 hours being introspective in your own head.
Yeah. Or even if you did it with somebody else, right? And talking the whole time. And again, nothing. I think that's great. I think that's worth doing. But I think one of the things you're alluding to.
Here's what maybe I would do. Sorry to interrupt. If we're talking about, because we have to classify this, what we're doing is we're classifying what you deemed as a micro-misogi.
Yep.
And maybe to get the power out of this 4 to 48 hours, it does need to be solo.
Yeah.
But if you were to go out for 5, 6, 7 days, 12 days a month, you doing that with a small group of people the need for it to be solo might not be as high.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's a good caveat. One thing that it reminded me of, and I have a note for it, is one of the things that Michael Easter was writing about with the Misogi. He pointed out the comparison, and you're doing it too, which is with the rites of passage, or with a rite of passage.
Rites of passage.
And I don't think we need to go down this rabbit hole, but I think he's got 3 sort of markers of what a rite of passage contained. And I think it's related to this sort of solitariness. And it's 3 things. Number 1, separation. The person exits society in which they live and ventures into the wild. 2, transition. The person enters a challenging middle ground where they battle with nature and their mind telling them to quit. And 3, incorporation. The person completes the challenge and re-enters their normal life, an improved person. So I just, in your story about the Spartans there, that it reminded me of that.
Yep.
We'll be back with more in just a few minutes, but let's say thanks to a few sponsors. We're brought to you this time around by LMNT. Have you gotten your calloused mitts on LMNT sparkling yet? If not, let's go. Head to drinklmnt.com/excellence to learn more and to become an LMNT insider, which is the only way you can currently get yourself some LMNT sparkling. Why would you want to do that? Well, let me tell you. LMNT sparkling has 0 sugar, 0 caffeine, and is packed with all the electrolytes you need, with flavors like citrus salt, watermelon salt, grapefruit salt, and the debut of black cherry lime. There's something for everyone. Each can supports your health across various occasions, turning the tide against sugar-laden and stimulant-loaded drinks. Imagine better hydration, sharper focus, and improved energy without the crash. Remember, it's only available to LMNT insiders initially, so if you've purchased an LMNT insider bundle in the last 9 months, you're in. Otherwise, grab yourself an insider bundle to get access. Once you get onto the website, log in with whatever email you used, and you'll see it if you purchased that insider bundle. Don't forget, you can still get a free LMNT sample pack with any drink mix purchase. All you've got to do is head to drinklmnt.com/excellence. Stay hydrated, stay healthy, and enjoy the next chapter in the salty rebellion with LMNT Sparkling. We're also brought to you this time around by the Washington Post. I don't have to tell you that the world, especially right now, is so full of noise. You want to be informed, but don't want to get overwhelmed in the process, which is why we recommend the Washington Post. Right now, you can head over to washingtonpost.com/excellence and subscribe for just 50 cents per week for your first year, an entire year. That's 80% off their regular price. As someone always on the move, I love how the Washington Post keeps me informed on the go. Their app makes it easy to catch up on the latest health trends, world news, and so much more. You can even listen to articles, which is a cool feature for audio lovers like you and me. Plus, if you're short on time but still want to stay informed, the Post's The 7 newsletter is perfect. It's a quick read that covers all the top stories, and you can even listen to it as a podcast. Whether it's Capitol Hill updates, climate change insights, or the latest in tech, they've got you covered. Take advantage of this fantastic offer. With the election season coming up, did I mention the noise? There's no better time to stay informed without getting overwhelmed. Go to washingtonpost.com/excellence to subscribe and stay ahead of the curve. Remember, that's just 50 cents per week for your first year. washingtonpost.com/excellence. Okay, let's get back into the episode. So that's rule number 2, solitary and device free. Again, we can come back to any of these, but number 3, no two can be the same. This is just a quick quote. And I think this is a quote from somebody that Michael Easter was interviewing. But the more quirky the Misogi, the less chance you can compare it to anything else. And I really like that. I think it'd be a different thing entirely. And it's even like something with the 12-hour walk, which is obviously like a shared thing that we've talked about before. Even doing that again, you can't help but say, okay, well, the last time I did it, I walked X number of miles, or I went this route, and so the entire process is even accidentally an act of sort of judgment and comparison. And I'm not going too fast as I did, or I'm going faster than I used to. And so I really like this idea of no two being the same, because you can remove entirely that idea of, am I doing a good job? Because doing a good job is not the point.
Yeah. I think there's a lot. I think what we could even add on to that is imagine the rule is like, yes, it can't be repeated. It can't have been something you've done before. And similar to get rid of the judgment, because I think there's the thing in there is like, well, even if you're going to like, is it known by others? Because when it's known by others, you have this thing of like, so almost like you can't, whatever it is, you can't post about this, right? This isn't for bragging rights. So that's like, it becomes way more internal. It's like, I'm passing this, I'm going through this for me. This is not something that I'm going to go and like, I'm not climbing the social status ladder. Otherwise, there's this other weird motive behind it, which is I'm going to get more likes. I'm going to get more followers. I'm going to get more respect. I'm going to get whatever it is. I think it should be internal. And I think a lot of this has, obviously, that's kind of the running theme is we're doing this for the internal growth. I like the new, and it's not now. I do think that you could possibly repeat similar things, right? But as long as it's not the same, meaning I'm not going to go and do the, I'm trying to think. I'm not going to do a back-to-back high rocks, right? Whatever that is. And I know it's not solo, it's not by yourself, it's not outside, but you get the idea. That's a very big challenge, or maybe a Spartan race. I'm going to go and do after everyone leaves, right? The next day while all the equipment is still up, I'm going to go and do the Spartan Ultra Beast, the 30-mile version of it. Certainly very, very hard. But even if you were to do that, like Spartan kind of does this. Oh, it's weird I'm talking about Spartans again. I didn't realize that. But those change every single time. And I wonder if that's one of the reasons they do it, is unlike High Rocks, those do change every time. It's never the same course at Killington, which is the home of the original and the World Championships. I say that like you could probably, and I don't know, this is like, you tell me, but if you were to walk across the United States, right? It certainly does not meet the 4 to 48 hours, but if you were to do like a true Misogi, the next time, if you walked across the United States, but you took a different route, I don't think that's what I mean. It's like it can be similar, just as long as it's not the exact same. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I agree with that, because there's probably only a few. I mean, really, there's only a few modalities that these Misogis will likely live in, right? It's walking, right, hiking, biking, swimming. Like there's an element of movement and motion that's going to repeat themselves. So whether you walk 12 hours in this direction, or you walk 12 hours up and down a mountain, it's still walking for 12 hours, but the context, the environment, the challenge in and of itself is different. So I think there's going to be some built-in similarities.
Well, that's interesting to hear you say that in terms of like there's going to be some similarities of walking, running, biking. Does that mean that it needs to have a physical component? Like what if it was just, I'm going to go live in the woods. I'm going to go with a tent. And I'm going to go into my backyard, and I'm going to live out of a tent. And I'm not going to go into my house. I'm going to do that for 3 days, something like that. Does that fit the bill? I'm not going to talk to anyone. I'm going to Vice. I'm just going to. Or what about like could a silent retreat? I'm going to go for a week to a silent retreat. Is that a Misogi? Because in your thing, you don't have physical.
Correct.
And I'm wondering if it needs it or no. Like we should qualify that it doesn't need to.
It's a good question. And this actually, maybe I'll bring in the next one, which is quittable, because I think that this is what I thought about when it was quittable, though the things you just listed are certainly quittable, right? Like after 2 days of sitting in your backyard, you might just be like, I'm done here. But here's why I brought quittable in. There's a couple quotes. First one, Misogis are inward facing. A big part of the value proposition is that I'm going to do something that's really uncomfortable. I'm going to want to quit, and it's going to be hard not to quit because no one is watching, but I'm not going to quit because I'm watching. And then the second quote is actually a quoting somebody named Marcus Elliott, who he talks to a lot about Misogi. And so this is the quote from Eliot. In Misogi, you'll reach this edge where you are convinced you have nothing left, but you'll keep going anyway. And then you'll look back and you'll be way out beyond what you were certain was your edge. And so is sitting in the backyard for 3 days, is that going to bring you to your edge? I don't think so. If it was 13 days, maybe. But I think the condensing it to, and again, this is arbitrary, 4 to 48 hours, right? We can change that. But condensing it to that sort of requires that you ratchet up the intensity to a degree to reach this sort of this edge, or to at least begin to be in the ballpark of the edge that Eliot is talking about. And so that's why I think maybe I just kind of assumed it, but or embedded in this idea of the Misogi, that it is something physical, that it is something that you are moving, and or you are moving something external to yourself at the same time. But I don't know.
Yeah, I think that the one that I was kind of leaning into as well is this is where that quittable one comes into, which is I was like saying it's got to be for yourself, right? It can't be for somebody else. There's not a leaderboard. You're not going to post about this thing, so. Yep. That kind of fits this portion of that definition, which I like. I think for a Misogi, it's different than a transformational experience, right? I think that you could go drive solo across the United States by yourself. I don't know if I would classify that as a Misogi because I don't think it's physically demanding enough. It's a type of thing where you're gonna. And even that is like hard. Like I'm tired of sleeping in a tent. I'm tired of sleeping in my car. I just want to shower. I don't want to be driving anymore. Like you could want to quit, but I think it's more like there's got to be a physical. I think there needs to be a physicality to it. So maybe that's like 4B of that is that it's physical and quittable.
Physical and quittable. I like that. Yeah, I like that.
What would be something that's not quittable? What do you mean by so? What is just what would not be quittable?
I mean, I guess it's something that wouldn't put you in a place where you would consider quitting. In other words, like if it was, and this is a silly example, but to illustrate, if it was like a 3-hour walk on the beach, like there's probably not a point there where you're like, gosh, this is too hard. I'm done here. Right? You're likely like, certainly people listening to this, but most folks can go on a 3-hour walk or a hike up the local mountain that isn't that high. Those aren't quittable to me, though they are movement based. They are outside in nature. You could do that alone. You can do that with without a device. And you can certainly find a new trail to walk on every weekend if you so desired. But none of them are quittable. There won't be a point where you literally, like I remember on the 12-hour walk that we did, and obviously we did them separately, but there were points in the last 2 to 3 hours, the last 2 hours really, where I was on, like I live on like a 4-mile road, where I was on the road and and the thought occurred to me multiple times, if my wife drives by me, what it was is I hope she doesn't drive by me because I will want to get in the car. And so I think you've got to get to a place, I think the thing has to get you to a place where the proverbial offer to be done, if somebody offered it to you, it would be hard, and it would be the struggle to say, nope, I'm going to finish this because I set out to accomplish this thing or finish this thing.
So maybe the word, if you're trying to get these to one words, maybe it's like hard.
Yeah.
You know, it's that. It's like it's physically hard enough that you will want to quit.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Physically difficult. Yep. I like that.
Difficult.
All right, last one.
That's it. Yep.
Last one. And again, we'll hopefully come back to these and play around with an idea or two as to what a micro-misogi even could look like in real life. But this last one, I'm going to bring in actually another book, and it's unlikely that you've read this, but this is a big part of where this idea came from. This idea of micro-misogi is from a book called Micro-Adventures by a guy named Alastair Humphrey. He's like a National Geographic like explorer of the whatever. He's done, bike.
What is an
trips
explorer of the whatever? What is the? I want to know what the whatever is
of the world.
You can't yada that.
Yada yada. We got to move on. But he's like done bike rides across the world. He's done like all these like epic adventures, and he wrote this book called Micro-Adventures because he found himself waiting and pining for the opportunity to do these big, mega, multi-month, multinational adventures as he's done them. And so he came up with this concept of the micro-adventure. I'm just going to read a little bit to give some context to it. But he says, don't make the mistake of thinking that because you only have the weekends free, you can't do anything different or adventurous. Use whatever time you have available, whatever gear and money and skills you have to squeeze in something new. The big adventures can come later. Start small, start this weekend, make stuff happen. And then another one, waiting for all your stars to align is a guaranteed way to ensure that the adventure you crave will never happen. Waiting until you somehow, suddenly and simultaneously have both loads of money and plenty of time is daft. And I like that quote because I get to use the word daft. He's British. But that was when I remembered this book, and I do recommend the book. It's a fun read. I recommend the book and not the ebook. The ebook is fine, but the book is really fun to look at. When I remembered this book while reading The Comfort Crisis, the Misogi and the idea of this Micro-Misogi really started to make sense. And how I started this is like, well, I'm probably not going to have 6 weeks to 6 months to go out on an adventure anytime soon. But if we remove that from the excuse of like, well, I just don't have enough time to do a proper Misogi. And we, again, confine this or constrain this to a Micro-Misogi can be done anywhere between 4 hours and 48 hours. And again, those are arbitrary numbers. We can figure out if those are the right ones. It started to be like, it begins to be the permission slip you need to not put it off till later, but instead, okay, with a little bit of planning and probably not a ton of training, quote unquote training, I could do this in 2 weeks. I could do this in 2 weekends. I could do this next month, right? And so I think that that's an important rule because, again, it gives us permission to say we don't need to wait for things to be perfect in order to do something like this.
Yeah. When you first said that, the 4 to 48 hours, I kind of scoffed at the 4. I was like, that's not long enough. That's like, we're not going to get there. But as you've been talking, I've been kind of like thinking like, okay, what falls into these categories and is 4.5 hours long enough to be transformational? And I certainly think it could be. And I think if we go beyond the 48 hours, to your point, so I'm trying to give credence to the brackets that we're putting around the Micro-Misogi. If we go above that, it's probably bridging more into like a true Misogi.
A true
if you're gone,
exactly.
If you're gone for 3 days, like 4 days, 5 days, that obviously takes more planning. It's not something you could do on the weekend, which I like the idea of that. Could you do this on the weekend? Yep. Basically, you don't have to let work know about it. You're just gonna you're just gonna go. And I was like, well, 4 hours is like that's definitely not gonna be. And I was like, well, what if you just, and maybe this is getting into like some examples of these things.
Yeah.
But what if you loaded up a backpack with whatever, 3/4 of your body weight or like at least half your body weight? Basically to the point, like if you sit down with this thing, you're not going to be able to get back up. That, right? Like that heavy. I've definitely done hikes with 80 pounds. I don't know if I've done a hike with anything higher than 80 pounds and I'm 170. So that's pretty close to half. Certainly I can get up off of a stump or a rock that I'm resting on by myself there, but a lot more than that, it would be really, really hard.
Yep.
So that's why I'm proposing like 3/4 your body weight. And what if you did like a 3-mile hike up to the top of a mountain? I'm thinking like around here, that'd be like climbing Mount Washington.
Yep.
Mount Washington normally takes a few hours to get to the top of. It's probably about 3 hours. Well, if you were to do it with that, like the level of stuff that would go through your mind in terms of how hard that would be, I think that's that Micro-Misogi that we're talking about. What if we went for a 4-hour swim?
Yep.
Like what if we swam 5 miles, by yourself? Now, I'm not saying be unsafe and that sort of thing. Like have whatever it is you need to do to make that as safe as you can. Do it along the shore where you could stand if you needed to or something. I don't know, but this is the spirit, not the letter.
Yeah. One of the rules of Misogi is don't die. So
don't die, right? Yes.
That applies to the Micro-Misogi.
So you talk to all the sharks beforehand and all the sharks understand that they're not going to eat you and that stuff.
This is for transformation.
Yes. But like to me, like I think you could get these things in a 4-hour thing if you chose the right stuff.
Yep.
Now, the 12-hour walk I would put in there. That's where I kind of went like, that's the lowest.
Yep.
But then I was like, well, because that's walking.
Yep.
Like if you made it harder than walking, you could shorten up the distance. So I think a lot of that comes into it, right? If you're
Agreed.
If you're not going to be walking the whole time, you could probably go longer than 12 hours, right? Like you're going to go into the woods, build yourself a shelter and sleep in it for 2 nights. Like, okay, yeah, that's cool. And like, you're going in there with, very minimal food, maybe enough food or no food, because you can sustain yourself for 2 days. Like go in there with nothing and just like go and build your own shelter and sleep in the woods that to me is like, that's not nothing. That's something. So I think your parameters in there, when I first heard them, I was like, no, I'm going to push back on those. But those seem to line up fairly well for what I would think of as a micro-misogi. Outside, solitary, no devices, different, new, unique, hard, challenging, will make you want to quit.
Yep. And
something that's in that 4 to 48 hours range. I think those are, I don't like to agree with you. I would like to challenge those. Maybe I challenge you a little bit on the quittable one, but all the others certainly seem to resonate really well.
Any else that are worth putting on the table? Any other rules or constraints that you feel like are maybe missing there, or would at least be fun?
Well, I do like the one that I kind of propose, which is like, this isn't for you to like post about. You're not recording this. You're not videoing this. You're not going back and blogging about it. You're not going to go back and this is now your latest YouTube episode. This isn't for, a little micro campaign of you on, Instagram. Because when you do that, there's a totally different motivation. I'm doing this for social status. Yep. I'm doing this for likes. And there's going to be a different motivation inside of you as opposed to like, this is for me. Like, I think that's a big part of it is like, this is for me. Michael Easter was going to write a book. So it's like, there's a little bit of that like, well, did he really? Yep. He was there to kind of like, to do research. Whereas the other guys he was with were doing this because they enjoyed the challenge of it for the challenge of it. So again, not to say like, if you hit 4 of these 5, if you hit 3 of these 5, are you still passing? I would say yes, right? Yeah. Particularly when, again, done is better than perfect. Like the idea of we have to wait to line up to make everything perfect. It's just like, that's why all diets start on a Monday. And when Monday morning comes, you're like, next Monday.
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe the last, I like the examples you gave, and I think we could come up with lots of examples, but I think it's more interesting for folks out there to actually come up with, and I'm going to do this after this conversation, come up with 3 to 5 to 6 that fit into these rules. And then, so the last question is just frequency. When you think about the actual Misogi, I think it was one of those things that like, maybe you do it once a year, maybe you do it every other year, because they are those big things that require training. Like in the book, Michael Easter, I think he trained for six months just to be able to go out on this Alaska hunt, because he just wasn't physically and skill-wise prepared for it. And so like, when I think about this after this conversation, I think like, could we do this once a quarter? And again, does that allow us to get a lot of what that big Misogi accomplishes in the little bite-sized bits that our lives might allow for? And so maybe, is it quarterly? Is it twice a year? I think that's an interesting kind of next question.
Well, I've shared this on this podcast before, but the Jesse Itzler version of this, who is build your life's resume, not your professional resume, but your life resume. Is he the guy
who co-wrote with David Goggins or something?
Yes, Living with a Seal. Yeah, he also sold like NetJets.
Yes.
His wife is the lady that started Spanx and is now they're like multi-billionaires. He's the one that puts on the 29, the 17 trips up and down Stratton Mountain. Yep. So you're climbing the equivalent of climbing Mount Everest. So he does a lot of this type of stuff. His thought is you do a micro every quarter and then you do a big one every year.
Got it.
I think that depending on the big one, depending on what that is, could be a lot, right? If you're going to go and spend 6 weeks in the Alaskan outback, I think this is a weird one. Biannually, is that twice a year? Or is that every other year?
I think it can honestly mean both, but I know what you mean. Every other year.
Every other year. For like the epic ones, that seems to make a lot of sense. But I think that concept is pretty darn good. Like and he doesn't do it in terms of this. He's like, but every quarter, go do something cool, epic, amazing, right? Go camping in Yosemite, right? Go and follow the band Fish for 3 weeks, right? Like just something like that's
do
really,
something
really
novel,
cool.
Do something exciting.
Yeah,
do something
exactly.
Out of
Every
the,
quarter.
Out of the ordinary. Yeah.
Yep. So I think that's a real good thing because, again, when you look back on the last year, the last 3 or 4 years, the last decade, what we will remember is anything that's routine, and this is the people that are like, we are the people that are like espousing routine.
Right.
Anything that's routine is going to be forgotten. That's what it is. So you need these like kind of like signposts, these epic moments. And that's why, Heather has gotten on me before. She listens to this podcast and she's like, you were going through like different years. You were trying to figure something out in a year that you and Patrick were having a conversation about. And you were like, well, I think it was 2000. Yeah, I think it was 2014 because that was the year the CrossFit Games X, Y, and Z. She's like, that's also the year your daughter was born. But that's what it is. It's like those like emotional, epic moment. That's what we signpost to. Is we're like, this is when those things happened.
Yep. I love that. And I think that's right. I even think about the 12-hour walk that we did, I think it was a couple years ago. Like even if it was just a long walk, it's like, I'll remember that because it was so out of the ordinary, because it was so, physically challenging, mentally, interesting, but it was just so outside of the norm that like, I'll never forget that.
I can't tell you what I had for dinner 2 nights ago. I could tell you so much about that walk.
Right.
Like so much about that walk. I remember the feelings, the stops. I can remember where I was walking on the road and where I was walking on the trail. Like my thoughts at certain points. Like that's amazing. That's like heightened life experience.
I bought at one point, probably halfway through, I bought a very cheap cup of coffee because I went by a little cafe, and I remember distinctly like sitting by the ocean, drinking that cheap cup of coffee, and like I remember how good that tasted. And it was not a good cup of coffee. So it was like to your point, really cool. This has been really fun. I'm glad we were able to do this. Read The Comfort Crisis. I do recommend Micro Adventures, and then we've been mentioning there is a book called The 12-Hour Walk by Colin O'Brady. We've had him on the show before. That's sort of the impetus of this 12-hour walk. I think there's probably, if you were to read that or if we were to read that now with this conversation in mind, there's probably a lot of takeaways from that book in this conversation as well. So I would love to, I'll maybe follow up on this with you at some point if we can get some Micro-Misogis under our belt, not because we're going to talk about them, but just as a follow-up to this conversation. I think that'd be really fun. And I would love for folks out there to brainstorm and to come up with some ideas and to really put them out into the world and see if we can't kind of build a little bit of a movement here with Micro-Misogis. I think that'd be really cool.
Sounds good.
All right, man. Thank you. Thank you everybody out there for listening. Again, if you want to join us in the Chase Club for our next book club, we don't know what book it's going to be yet, but whenever we figure that out, chasingexcellence.email, get on the free newsletter list, jump into the Chase Club. You'll be there for the next book club. We'll have some fun. Thank you in advance. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing to the show wherever you're listening to this. And I'll be back soon for a brand new episode of Chasing Excellence.